we have in releasing a report near probably 2, 3, 4 months from now. We will have it out this year. And we have already determined it's going to be 3 discs, and it's all going to come out simultaneously in a 3-disc set.
Now, we have links, Sherry. We have links to Brent and his organization on the Coast to Coast website, so you can check that out for more information. I would say, Brent, when you go back up to the pole, you're probably going to need some kind of an independent journalist to go along with a camera. Maybe I need to go along with you.
Actually, they have quite a number of journalists who have already volunteered.
Really?
The actual cost per person is approximately $50,000 a person.
Wow.
My team, I have 6 people.
I'm going to have to start saving my pennies then. We're going to go to west of the Rockies. Clint is up there in Alaska, which might not be a bad place to be if all this stuff comes true. Clint, how you doing?
Hi, George. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
And I have to agree with you on the gloom and doom. I don't agree with it. My question is for Mr. Miller is, what if the calendars are wrong and it don't happen in 2012?
Independent of the calendars, just pretend the calendars never existed. Independent of the calendars, the quantum physicists have already confirmed that the center of our galaxy is a supermassive black hole. They've confirmed the location of the galactic plane. The astrophysicists have already mapped out the time in which we are going to be crossing the galactic plane, and they estimate it within 2 or 3 days of this calendar that we won't talk about at the end of 2012. And the scientific effects that would occur on this planet are predicted based on the influences of that plane, and those effects are happening. So all the effects that we would expect to happen are happening, and it has never happened. A collection of these events have never happened in the history of this world. And in recent history, in the last 11,000 years, modern history, that we have recorded information. So with the absence of the calendars, pretend they never existed, Mayan, Aztec, Egyptian, which all agree, by the way, we would still come to the same conclusion based on the scientific evidence, based on the polar ice cap samples, based on the magnetic lattice structure that is locked into the Atlantic ridge as the Earth cools, so we know where the previous pole shifts were. The scientific evidence is tremendously overwhelming, irregardless of the calendars.
Fair question there, Clint, and a good answer, Brent. We're going to go to Mark in Oregon on the wildcard line. How you doing, Mark?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Sure.
A couple comments, and then while everybody was talking, something else came up. But I back at Ohio State years ago, I was in climatology, took some other things like astronomy, and we had talked about the heliosphere. And I remember specifically the week that we were talking about it, it was said that the heliosphere changes its diameter, and it follows the sun's solar maxima and minima. So when the sun gets its diameter increased, you get El Nino, the southern oscillation in the Pacific Ocean. The heliosphere puffs as well. And then the other thing that was interesting about the pole shift, maybe it was 2 years ago on this program, there was a gentleman that was speaking about magma, and all over the Earth, magma, when it solidifies, it etches into it the field, the magnetic field of the day that it actually solidifies. And what was said was that there may be a situation where there's multi-poles, like not 2, but like 8, 10, as many. It could all. It just would depend on how slow the Earth would spin, and the atmosphere would increase its height, and you'd have a very hot situation. The Earth actually would really heat, and so it was. They were making reference to. The Earth would have multiple poles, Van Allen convergences along.
Is that your question? You want to ask about the multiple poles? Okay, Brent.
Okay. I see 2 questions in that. Let me answer them in reverse order. We'll talk about the poles first. As the magma, say, for example, we'll go back to the Atlantic Ridge. As the magma on the Atlantic Ridge, which I mentioned in absence of the calendars, cools, it does lock in the current magnetic structure of the Earth at that point in the Atlantic Ridge at that time. what we're talking about is a geographic pole shift, not a magnetic pole shift. During the wobble, during the period of where the Earth is wobbling, during the transition point in a real physical pole shift, the magnetic poles fluctuate wildly, and we see that in the Atlantic Ridge. But then they stabilize. Now, the magnetic poles are never the same as the geographic poles because it takes thousands of years for them to match up and align up. So what we do is when you take a core sample of lava, actually it's hardened magma down the Atlantic Ridge, and go back in time, you can see the orientation of the poles of the Earth, and then you see multiple fluxes, and then you see a new orientation. Now, that is just one of the components that tells us at that point in time in history the poles shifted. Using that with a number of other models showing for instance, the continental shelf, how they change, we can basically determine the path of the pole. Mr. Hapgood, Charles Hapgood, wrote a very good book on the path of the poles, mapping out the last three poles. And in fact, the poles themselves on the Earth changing is not, again, Earth-centric. NASA has just collected evidence, and they believe that they just recently released a report that Mars itself has undergone at least two pole shifts that they can see.
Right, I read that. Yeah.
So that's a good question. Let me touch back on your first. I think it's an implied question. The heliosphere. You are correct. The heliosphere is the boundary, the interstellar boundary created by the solar wind, basically creating some sort of sphere around our solar system as we move through the intergalactic radiation. The heliosphere has basically two primary forces: a force coming in from the outside pushing against it, and the force from the sun itself emanating the solar wind, the supersonic speed charged particles, pushing outward. But what we're seeing is a consistent year-by-year decrease, 25% over the last 10 years. Even though we're approaching a solar maximum, it is still decreasing, and that has NASA worried, and that's why they launched the Interstellar Boundary Explorer in October.
Thanks for that call, Mark. We're out of time. Brent Miller, founder of the Horizon Project. Been a fascinating discussion. I encourage you to come back and see us after your next report's out, and certainly keep us posted on that trip to the North Pole. That sounds like quite an adventure. I gotta say, I hope you're wrong about these predictions, but something about this is truly spooky. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, George.
We'll talk to you again sometime. And thanks to all of you. Ian and George will be here through the week, and I'll see you later on this month. Thanks, everyone. Good night.